Alright, welcome everybody to another installment of Austere Blender Tutorials. I'm Austere Grim, and today we're going to be looking at the ocean simulation. I've got a sample render here that shows what I'm going to show you how to create today. It's a real simple ocean animation with some atmospheric lighting and some scattered light effect. So it's pretty simple, and let's get into it. Go ahead and stop that. I'm going to use Blender 2613. This is the current beta build for 264. If you have 263A, that's fine. There isn't much difference between 26313 and 263A for the ocean sim. I just like using this because I find it's a little bit more stable using this version. So we're going to open up a basic scene. If you have the default cube, go ahead and delete it, because what we're going to use is we're going to go ahead and add a plane. So this plane, we're going to go over here to our modifiers, add a modifier of ocean. We can see that it's already applied the ocean modifier to it. The scale of this has gone up, and I'm going to describe to you what the modifier tool does. First, we have geometry. There's two options for geometry. One's displace and one is generate. Displace only affects the vertices of the object that we're applied the modifier to. So if you're using a plane, you've got the 4 vertices. That's all it's going to change. You're not going to have anything else be affected. That's why we go with generate. Generate actually changes our entire mesh to our ocean simulation, which we can use to repeat how many times it does the generation of the ocean. When you're starting out here, you want to leave your repeat at 1 for X and 1 for Y, just so that you understand how it works. You don't want to overtax your system. If you have it set for repeat of 5 and 5, and you start playing with the resolution and stuff, you'll then have way too many vertices, and you'll just crash Blender. So we'll leave it at 1, 1 right now. Our next setting here is time. Time is actually the ocean simulation time, which we will keyframe into our timeline here. This is the time in seconds of how the ocean simulation exists. So depending on like the wind velocity here, it will change where our waves are within our actual timeline. So the next option is spatial size. I'm going to leave it at 50. This is actually the size of the simulation domain in meters. Our rectangle here is the domain. If you've done simulations before, physics simulations, you know what the domain is. Since there isn't any bounding box for this, this is the bounding box for our simulation. The spatial size is how far from this point to this point in meters that it's going to simulate. The larger you get it, let's go up to 500 here. That's quite a large ocean. So if you were going to do, let's say, a helicopter scene where you're going to fly over the ocean, you can then set your spatial size up and change the other settings to get some other resolution in here, and you don't have to use the repeat X and repeat Y to create a huge ocean, and it will also generate it so that it looks right for your scene. We can bring it down to 5, and you'll see how it looks, a little bit closer as the ocean there. I'm going to leave it at 50 because that's about what I want for my scene. It just looks like we're kind of right over the ocean, and it looks really good. The next setting here is resolution. Resolution is the real changer here in this ocean. Resolution is the detail. I read the wiki and it said at 16 of resolution you got a 256 by 256 grid on your plane. It's hard for me to kind of describe to you how this looks, but I think under wireframe, yeah, so it would be 256 by 256, and that displacement is affected to that. In that video that I created, that was a resolution of 23. I think that looked really good. That was decent enough for a render, and it was just, you know, the right size. You can go a little bit higher if you want, like you can go up to 30 and you can get some more detail, but 23 was good enough for me for that. Our next option here is depth. Depth is how deep the sea is, or your ocean simulation is, in this block, in meters. So if you, it doesn't really actually change much, but it does make a little bit of difference if you're going to, you know, change how deep the ocean is. So I just leave it at 200. There, like seriously, there was nothing that I could tell that it changed. So that's the geometry of your ocean and your domain, basically physics of it. The next section here is waves. You've got some options for the waves. The choppiness at 1, you can set it up to 3, gives a little bit more edge and choppiness to those waves. Go up to 5, you can get a little bit harder waves. You can go up to 10, and you get some really folded over wave patterns here. The higher the choppiness, it starts to look kind of fake, but it gives a real waviness to it depending on what your scene is, and you know, if it's a storm, this may be more accurate to what you're looking to do. But I leave the choppiness down at 1. I don't want too much choppiness. What I really want in my scene is more of ocean swells, and that's where scale comes in. Scaling is where we can get it to start to swell the ocean. We can go up to 5, and you can really see these ocean swells. This is, again, if you had a storm effect, you can get you know, some real storm-like winds and, you know, real good swells here. This is a little bit too much for my scene because I don't want it to be really too stormy, but I'll leave it at 2. That was what I had set in my render, and that looks about right. The smallest wave setting here is the lower limit for how small of a wave can be generated. Basically the detail of waves. If you bring it down to 1 or 0.0001, you don't see much change. If you went up in resolution, you'd probably start to see that change a little bit. But where you will see this change is if we go up to 1.0, you'll see that our ocean is really, really smooth. So that doesn't matter to me. I'll leave it the default of 0.01. That gives us enough detail in our scene. Wind velocity is affected by time, your spatial size, and this actually affects where the waves are on the plane. This will tell the waves how quickly they move across your scene. If you had a storm-like system that you wanted to create, you can turn the wind velocity up, and that would create more violent waves, more speed to them. Next is the alignment. The alignment is additional waves in your scene here. If you change the alignment a little bit, you'll notice that it really affects my scale. What this actually does is it adds direction of additional waves. So adding additional waves affects the scale. So if you are going to use alignment, you want to adjust your scale appropriately. So I brought it back down to 1. It looks about where I had it. But I'm going to turn alignment back off and turn my scale up, just because I don't need to do the extra work for the alignment for this scene. It's a real simple scene, and it's not something I want to go too much into detail and create too much realism to it. I just wanted to give a quick render. Next are these two options, the generate normals and generate foam. Generate normals outputs normals for bump mapping. If you don't need it, if you don't use it, just leave it unchecked. It can slow down your render. The next option is to generate foam. What this does is it generates a foam mask as a vertex color channel, and that allows you to add a particle system within that vertex channel that you could then create artificial foam on this ocean. Again, I'm not going to use that just because I don't want to create the foam, and it's just supposed to be a clear blue ocean kind of a scene here. So that's pretty much that. So the first thing we're going to go into here is we're going to set the time. I want to make it a little bit easier to do some calculations here. So my scene is only going to be a 10-second render. So I'm going to turn this down to 240 frames. At 24 frames per second is 10 seconds. That makes it easier so that when I go in here to the modifier, I can go to frame 0, set my time to 0, add a keyframe with the I key, go to frame 240, change the time to 10 seconds, add another keyframe. So now you'll see that time changes as we go across here. Now if you've done anything with animation before, you'll know that under the graph editor you have your F-curves. And when you keyframe things, you will have, by default, these curves. A Bezier curve. And when you're doing something with time, this does not look right. You'll have it go slowly into time, and then it starts to speed up, and then it slows back down out of time. If you're going to render this, it looks really funky because you have a slow moving wave, and then it gets really fast, and then you have another, then it slows really down. So you want to go in here to the interpolation mode of our keyframe here, interpolation mode, and turn it to linear. That straightens it out and makes it a constant time speed. So bring that back down, go back to timeline, and you won't notice it really right now, but we can go through here and you can now see the ocean doing its thing. Really good. I like this. It was a real simple setup, and this is what I wanted to see. Okay, so now I've got the ocean set up. Now I'm going to set up the rest of my scene. I'm going to go from a top down, hitting 7 on the numpad key, or the keypad, the number 7 on the keypad. I'm going to go ahead and bring my camera to the southernmost point on my ocean. I'm now going to point it north. So if you look here, north is y plus, east is x plus, south is y negative. So now you can see that my camera is pointing northern. Now I'll explain why I do this in a minute. Actually, I'll explain it right now. Because I'm going to go and look at my camera, or look from the camera view, and I'm actually going to go ahead and rotate so I can see across the scene here. And I'm going to set up my world sky, or the world surface background. I'm going to use the sky texture. And if you haven't ever used this before, or if you have and you don't understand how this works, this sphere here is actually your scene looking down onto your scene. The white dot being in the middle of the sphere is the sun being completely 12 o'clock noon. This is north, or y plus, y negative, and x. So I want to bring the sun towards the northern horizon. And we can see that here, that the sun is in the background. So that's how that works, is you use that sphere to bring where the sun is in the horizon. The next setting here is the turbidity. Turbidity is actually the haze in the sky, which can affect how it feels your altitude is for your scene. I bring this down to 1.6 because that will add more turbidity to the scene. Actually, I'm sorry, 1.7. That adds turbidity to the scene. That adds a lot of haze. The lower in altitude you go, the more haze, atmospheric haze there's going to be, because you're further away from the edge of our atmosphere. The higher up in altitude you go, the less haze there's going to be, so the higher the turbidity, you're going to change that higher. The next thing, when you change the turbidity really low, you're going to have a lot of brightness, so you're going to want to turn down the strength to get more of a sunset feel to it. I bring it down to 0.1 and you get a nice sunset look to this. Let's actually rotate so we can kind of see this here. Okay, we can see the sun and how it's setting. Looks pretty good. And bring it back down. I don't like the static 35mm focal length here. I'll turn that down to 24. I think there's a little bit of width when we're working with a widescreen setup at 1920 by 1080 frame. I just kind of like having that 24mm focal length. It gives a little bit of a wideness to it. Okay, so now we've got our sky, we've got our ocean going. Now we need to kind of get this to look like a real ocean. As we haven't applied a material to this yet, we're going to go in here and add a material. Of course, oceans are not diffuse. Our two options for an ocean are glossy and glass. You could use glass if you were going to have a water scene where you had seaweed or fish underneath or sharks that you needed to see underneath. You would just need to make sure that you had another plane or another object that was getting rid of the sky underneath. Basically like an ocean floor or something to really diffuse that out so that you don't see just blank sky underneath. But since I'm not going to actually do anything with an ocean floor, or I don't need to see through the ocean, I'm just going to leave it at glossy. A glossy is really good because it just gives a good reflective surface. Leave it at Beckman. I like to give it a little bit of color here, a little bit of blue. That looks good. Really like that. And I'll give it a roughness of 0.02. I think 0.03. 0.03 was a good roughness. And we can go through here and start seeing the waves and how it looks. Looks pretty good. Okay. So that's our scene. one last thing that I noticed as I was starting to go through some photos for reference of how an ocean looks is that you don't get a lot of surface scattering. And actually we're getting some good surface scattering here, but it's not really great. When I was looking at some pictures of me and my father going fishing on the ocean, I noticed you get a really high strength highlight on the ocean surface here. And we're not really seeing that. At least we don't see that from our sky with the strength we gave it. We could go back and give it a little bit of extra strength to give that highlight, but it's way too much turbidity and it really ruins the scene by adding way too much light. The way that I fooled this was, I'll go in here to the wireframe mode and look from the top down. I added a circle. I do an N-gon fill type, so we have a face. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this circle and put it towards where our sun is. We're going to bring it over here and rotate it just so that we have it up in the sky here. Now it's kind of small and it may not be what we want just yet, but we can see where it is. So I'm actually going to grab it. I'm just going to bring it up here to where the center of our sun looks like it's to be. Now I want this to be an emitter, and I want to set it up so it's pretty bright and give it some yellow. Okay. Now it's still pretty small. When I talk about the reference photos, the scattering is pretty wide, and you'd see here that this is where our scattering would actually be. So we kind of want to scale this up to give a lot of surface scatter. Now maybe 20 is a little bit too high for our strength. I think I set it down to 4. Let's go to 3.5. About 2.5. Let's go 3. So 3, we can kind of give it a nice yellow thing here. So I kind of wanted to play with this a little bit. Scale by X. Give it a little bit of width. Not too much. Yeah. Okay. So you don't need to do this. You can keep it a circle if you want, depending on how you want to set this up. But of course you do notice that you've got a huge dot in the sky now. That does not really look like a sun. So what you can come over here and do, so we hide these, is ray visibility under the object settings. Now in here what you can do with this is you can change, how does this render out? How is this object rendered? It reflects on the glossy surfaces. It would reflect on the diffuse surfaces. It also is visible for transmission rays and shadow rays. But we don't want it to show up in the camera. So we can turn off the camera ray visibility. That leaves our glossy surface here. So we get some surface scattering of the sun, which looks pretty good. And we now don't have that object sitting in our sky. Come back out here. I think it looks really good. I may want to add a little bit more roughness to our material here. 0.05. It's to kind of blend things out. Let's bring it down. 0.01. Not too sharp. 0.07. Okay, that gives it some roughness and kind of blends it out. Let's see. The next we want to go to is full global illumination. Okay, and let it render for 30, see what that looks like. Yeah, it doesn't look too much different. So we can leave our render at 10, I'll maybe turn up to 15. So that's pretty much that. You can go ahead and come in here and play with your camera, give it a depth of field if you want. You know, set some distance, turn up the radius here. If you want to give it some focus and depth of field. And you may want to adjust where the camera is. Now, the closer you do bring it to the ocean looks bigger. But understand that if you are too close to the ocean and the ocean happens to pop up inside of your frame, you will see the edge of the ocean and it will look just funky. Actually, it looks like I did a pretty good job here. It's not popping up. If you have too much detail or too much scale and it's swelling too much, you might see it and it will look really weird. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I actually like that. I might render this one. One last thing I wanted to go into is I'm going to save this. As untitled is fine. I'm going to render this frame. One last thing I wanted to go into was the compositor. Where am I? Node editor. Use nodes, backdrop. Okay, looks good. If you've never used the compositor before, you might want to, at least use this as a test. Do a first render, and come in here and play with the nodes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the output for the viewer. Split this here. I did this with another render, which was a life raft type of render. It looked really good when I added one thing. If I can find it again. It was glare. For some reason, when you're on the ocean here, glare looks really good. You want to turn up the glare to high, and I think it was a fog glow I had. Now let's go back to streaks. Iterations 4. You just kind of play with this until you get something that you like. It's not doing anything I wanted. Oh, there we go. Going the wrong direction. Let's go down to 0.56. There we go, some sunset glare. Streaks of 5 looks good. Give an angle of that. And just kind of play with it here. So this is what I've got. It's that looks really good to kind of come in here with the compositor and play with your image, your scene, and give it just a once over with some quick image effects. It really does add something to your scene here. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that to my final render and exit that. And we're going to go ahead and save. Remember, save often with this. If you don't save that often, you're going to have a hard time with this. So that's pretty much it. I'm actually going to go ahead and render this. I didn't render this the first time I went through this tutorial, but I really like how this one's looking, and I'm going to go ahead and render it, and I'll post it up online with this tutorial. And I hope that you've learned a lot with how to set up your scene, how to set up your render for this ocean sim. Looks like a really great scene. It's real easy. It's real quick to set up. I think I did this in 30 minutes. To set this up. You can come back in here and play with your ocean modifier. Don't apply this until because this changes with time, so don't apply it, just let it go. You can come up here and change your resolutions if you want a little bit to maybe change how this looks. But 23 is where I had it set out, and it looks pretty good. If you need to, if you have a computer that can handle it, go ahead and turn up your repeats. Center your scene on your ocean, because that will make it look a little bit further out, and you won't have noticeable edges here. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask about it. I will try and clear up any open questions that you guys have. You can post on my blog at www.austeregrim.com, or you can go ahead and reply on this video at YouTube. And if you create a scene using the ocean modifier, I'd love to see it using the compositor effects or the effects that I've shown you how to set up a scene here. I'd love to see it. Go ahead and upload your video and show it to me, and I'd love to see it. So thanks for watching, and I hope you come back and see my next tutorial.